together this 80% Sig P226 matrix precision frame build, and I got all my parts from a Gunbusters kit. Some really dirty, probably the dirtiest parts I've ever gotten. And lo and behold, it turns out I have DAK parts, also known as double action Kellerman. I guess I was not paying attention while bidding, but I'm lucky. I have cool friends. Specifically, Matrix Precision, who is sponsoring this episode. Don't forget to like and subscribe, or else I'm going to be mildly annoyed. I really did not want to keep the double action Kellerman. I wanted to convert it to double action, single action, or what I call normal. There's a lot of sections to this video, so if you feel like fast forwarding, I've thrown up the chapters here, and you can see the timestamps that relate to them down in the description. When I first read up on what a DAK trigger was, it just sounded like a Glock trigger. I was like, oh, you have kind of almost two stages, there's a wall. No. Let's take a look at what the DAK means. I'm going to start this off by hand until we get to sort of perpendicular, and then we'll let the actual Wheeler gauge do its thing. My gauge only goes to 8 pounds, and it's a little bit above, so I would guesstimate that it can go further, but I would guesstimate that what we saw it go to was about 8 1/4. Let's give it another go. And that one we got about 8, but there is a second way that this trigger functions. Let's say that you shot your first round with standard double action, the slide cycle, and instead of going all the way forward with the trigger again, you just go until it resets. Now, I'm going to hold that there, and we're going to test the trigger pull now. Absolutely off the charts. I can't even measure that high, and you can feel it too. It is this massive penalty that you pay. Like, it's hard. There's a massive penalty that you pay for some odd reason for not letting the trigger go fully forward. So it's almost the opposite of a Glock trigger. Like, the Glock trigger, you go just do the reset and pull back again, and it feels nice. It's lighter than, say, going all the way forward. This is the opposite. It's heavier if you do not do the full trigger forward after each shot. Needless to say, I am not a fan of it. However, my buddies at Matrix Precision have decided to be nice, and they have sent me the parts to fix this. So I'm going to be teaching y'all how to do a DAK to double action, single action conversion. For fun, we are also going to throw in the short reset trigger, not the short reach trigger, the short reset trigger, because there's two SRTs in the SIG world. And I'm going to show y'all putting in nickel parts. We're going to break that into 3 sections though, so you can watch this video and be like, okay, here's what I'm going to do if I'm going from DAK to double action, single action. Here's what I'm going to do if I'm going SRT, and here's what I'm going to do if I also got the nickel conversion. In order to do this conversion though, absolutely everything has to come off except for the mag release, which I don't even have in anyways. So let's break her down. If you don't know how to break down the SIG, there are all sorts of videos that will show you already, or you can just watch me do it fast. Putting it together is what's going to be the interesting part here. Now that we've got this apart, we can actually go about doing the conversion itself. And I think the reason a lot of people get frustrated, struggle, or confused with the DAK conversions is they're overthinking it. So we're going to break it down into 2 steps to simplify the process. Step 1, identify the parts that need to be swapped or added. And then step 2 is just normal assembly like any other Sig P226 or 229. So let's start with identification, the hard part. If we look at the parts list that came with the conversion kit, we can quickly start swapping things out. So first things on the list are decocking lever and decocking lever spring. That's this guy and the associated spring that looks like a loop. There is nothing similar to that, so these are additions. Next up, we have the decocking lever bearing. Again, we do not have anything related to decocking in the DAK kit, so this is also an addition. Next up, we have a different hammer. So that is something that we already have. So we're going to take our DAK specific hammer and we're going to remove that from the equation and replace it with our hammer. Also, there should be a hammer reset spring. It looks like this S shape. There is no reset spring in the DAK world, and therefore that is an addition. Next, we need a different hammer strut. It has a modified shape up at this end. So we will swap that out with the hammer strut from our DAK. You can see the difference there. That's also going to mean that our mainspring and our mainspring seat are also going to be swaps. So we now have, in my case, the shorter E2 style hammer strut, mainspring, and mainspring seat. Next up is the safety lever. If you got the SRT kit, it is going to look like this. If you did not get the SRT kit, it will just look very similar to the one that you're replacing. Very similar. So this is a replacement. Next, we have our Sear. So again, another Sig OEM part, and it is a replacement. So I'm going to put that there, and I'm going to take this DAK Sear and remove. I'm also going to swap out the Sear spring. They might look the same, but from what I understand, they are different power levels. So if you want the weight to be accurate to a standard double action, single action, absolutely take the DAK spring and remove it from the equation. Last but not least, trigger bar. Again, obviously a replacement item. That's it. We now have everything in a pile to put this gun back together. If you are doing the SRT, I've already mentioned what the differences are. You'll have a slightly different sear that came with your kit, and you'll have a slightly different safety lever that came with your kit. But the installation from here forward for SRT or standard is going to be the exact same, except just the slightly different parts. You might have noticed that some of the parts that I showed are nickel, or in the mainspring seats case, aluminum instead of plastic. I did get some upgrades. So if you bought the nickel upgrade kit, we're also going to do a couple more swaps. We're going to swap out the magazine release, which I didn't even have in the pile because I didn't have it installed, but we're going to swap out the magazine release. We are going to swap out the slide release lever for a nickel one. The parts are the same. This is just color. We are going to swap out the hammer, the takedown lever, and my grip screws, which aren't in frame here. So again, follow those rules, and let's actually take a look at what's left from the original DAK after all that. There's not a lot. This is all that's left from the original DAK. Most of your pins, ejector, some of the springs, and the sear housing seat thing. I forget what that's technically called. But again, if you did not do the nickel upgrade, obviously we would still be looking at having in the pile the magazine release, the associated little parts to that, all those guys there, We would also have our grip screws, our trigger, our takedown lever, and our slide release. So again, depending on the way you're going, that might be the entirety of your original parts, or this might be the entirety of your original parts. That's it, the hard part's done. Now we're just gonna assemble it like normal. Let's get this thing back together, but before we get started, I want you to know that if you're watching and you're like, man, this guy sucks, it's because I'm looking through a tiny GoPro screen while doing everything to make sure that you guys are getting the best view. So do bear with me a little bit, give me a little bit of grace. The other thing is there are like 2 or 3 really crummy parts to putting together these frames. And a lot of places will tell you, hey, like just wiggle it until it goes. No, I'm going to teach you the secrets on how to do it to where you don't hate life. Also, for 2 reasons, I'm only going to talk about putting the mag catch together. 1, because it has nothing to do with the trigger swap, and 2, because it's a pain in the butt to get back out. And the piece, the plate that I got in my Gunbusters kit is absolutely beat to hell, so I really don't want to try and get that in there just to have problems getting it out while I wait for a new one. But what you would do for this is you would take this plate piece, and you'll notice that this has an angle to it. So does the plate piece. The little nub will face up, and it will slide into these like dovetails on the bottom of either side of this slot. When I say slide, it's going to be difficult. If you want to push it nice, take a little flathead screwdriver, cover it with several layers of tape, and then you can tap that into place. Once the plate is in place, what you're going to do is take the only spring that will fit into the back of your magazine catch. You're going to slide that into the slot like so. So it'll come out like that, but obviously you'll have the plate there pushing on that spring. And then last but not least, there is this little tiny detent with a spring in it as well. There's going to be a lip on that. That lip faces down. It goes into this side hole, and what you'll do is you will take the smallest punch that you have, you will push that detent in, and then you'll push the mag catch down. And what it's going to do is once it gets far enough down, it's going to pop into a little tiny relief hole in the frame there, and that's what's going to lock everything in place. So that's how you would do that. But let's get to what we're actually here for today. The first step is we need to install this trigger housing at the back. There are 3 pieces involved in this. This little like wedge shape, the smallest pin in your entire kit, and then we're going to look for this S-shaped spring. The S-shaped spring, we're going to take the bent section and we are going to put it up through the bottom of the wedge so it comes out at the top. And you can tell you've got it installed correctly because the little normal section of that spring will fit perfectly into a slot on the bottom. We are then going to insert this into the frame with the spring facing forward until we see the whole of the mainspring housing line up through the hole here on the frame. Again, take your, in this case, second smallest pin, and this is going to be a theme. We're going to use punches to help hold things in place for us while we put pins in. This is the 5/64. I'm going to insert that from the bottom, and I'm going to get it all the way through everything. If I needed to push things around, a flathead screwdriver helps. And once that's through, I'm going to just reverse it. I'm going to back it through with the actual pin that I want to stay in place. And then I'll just push it flush with the frame. Next up, we are going to tackle our hammer. The hammer just goes in like this, and we're going to kind of put it, we're going to avoid this pin here on the frame that's already there. We're going to kind of push it forward and then bring it back up so that that spring lives on top of this pin in the hammer. So again, we'll go forward a little bit and then kind of bring it back up. And at this point, we can go ahead and install our hammer pin. This one we don't need usually the help from a punch, because that one's pretty easy to go in, and we'll just center it up on either side like so. Next up is probably one of the more difficult places, and this is where the poster child for that technique of using a punch to help us guide things in comes from. So find a punch that fits nicely into the hole that goes through your rails. That one's good enough. Once you've identified that, take your ejector. The front hole goes over the pin that's part of the frame, and then you have to almost like rotate it down onto the side of the hammer there. If you try and just like put it down in, you won't be able to. So it's like put it on and then rotate down to the side of the hammer. This is where we're going to start taking the punch, and actually not quite yet, because next up is the sear. If you are doing the short reset sear, you are in for a treat, because this little arm here makes it slightly easier to install this sear than other ones because it's longer. Basically, we're going to grip it right around the hole, and it's got to go down into the frame. I'm going to grab it by that foot. If you don't have that foot, there's other ways to do it. You can kind of, instead, you can kind of use 2 fingers to wiggle it up in there. But basically what we're trying to do is get it between the pin in the frame and the hammer. But as you can see, if you've got that extra leg, it makes it a lot easier, because I can actually hold it in place. That allows me to now put my punch, get it into the actual sear, and now we are going to take our sear spring. It doesn't matter which way you install it, it's symmetrical. So we're going to back the punch out a little bit, holding the leg. I'm going to, actually I'll do it the other way so y'all can see a little better. So I'm going to take the leg, I'm going to make sure it goes in between the sear, and then again, my punch is going to hold it. The last piece that goes on the far side is the safety lever. Again, for short reset, it's going to look like this. If you are doing anything else, it's going to look more akin to that shape. But regardless, the way that we're going to grab it is by the little horn, no matter what. If it's this one, we grab it by this horn away from the hole. Or if it's the short reset, we again grab it by the horn, and everything goes straight down. So in this case, straight down like that. In this case, the leg goes straight down. And I'm going to back that out so I can have the space, and it's going to go through the hole in that as well. We are then going to take the sear pin, and once again, while holding the punch, we're going to use that as a guide so nothing falls out and everything goes through cleanly. We're going to make sure that it's fully seated inside the rail. Next up, we are going to install the hammer strut. I like to do it at this stage because I can still see what's going on, because there's actually 2 ways that this will feel like it's installed. Only one of them is correct. If you have your hammer slightly up and you try and install it, or you try and install it at an angle like that, it's going to feel like it's installed and you're like, oh yeah, cool. And like you move your hammer and it's going to move a little bit. And you're going to think it's installed when it really isn't, and heck, you're going to have a very hard time getting that to sit in a second. The correct way to do this is to have your trigger all the way back and look for that pin right there. That pin is what the little arm on the back of the strut is supposed to go around. So when you get it correctly seated, you can work that hammer and watch how much that moves. Lots of movement. That is what is correct. And also that's going to allow it to sit nice and flat along the back here, which allows us to finalize the installation by taking our mainspring and our mainspring seat. So that spring is going to go into the hole in the mainspring seat. And then we are going to make sure that that is sort of centered on this ramp. And we're just going to push up and keep this from flying around, and it's going to lock itself in. Watch. Done. And you can test the function. That is how you do it. So that's probably hard part number one. And for those that know the platform, you might say, like, how come you're not putting the sear spring down? I don't want to do that yet. That's going to come in for hard part number two in a little bit. All right, let's flip this thing over, and we're going to work on our decocker. This goes through that hole from the inside, and it's going to sit perfectly like that. So basically the bottom is going to be flat. I like to do it by just resting it on my finger and just going inside and getting it into that hole. Takes a little bit of effort, and then I'm going to rotate it. I had it too angled. All right, let's try that again. You can also use your other finger from the other side. There we go. Now it's going to seat flat against the back on the inside. We're then going to take our decocking lever. This section is going to sit on top of that, and it's going to go around this guy here. I'm going to switch to this other finger on the inside through the back like that, because what I want to do next is grab this little curly cue, and this spring goes around the top. So if you try and install it to where it goes around the bottom, it's going to do the reverse action of what you want. It needs to go around the top. We take this center section of the crook and we use that on the notch in the bearing plate. I just rotated the frame around a bit so I can hold this down too and still access that hole in the back. Because I'm going to take my needle and those pliers. I'm going to make sure not to scratch my frame. I'm just going to get it, the other tip, into that little hole there. And to do a function check now, we just go like that. Next up is the biggest pain in this entire process, and it is getting the trigger bar and the trigger in. You have to connect them first to get them in. There is no trick to putting the trigger bar in and then somehow attaching the trigger, which is what you're going to want to try and do because it's going to make it easier to get the bar in. This bar, when you're done, needs to sit all the way back like this. The reason it's difficult to do that is here I can kind of angle it to get around all those parts and put it in. When I've got the trigger attached, I do not have that luxury because the trigger has to go down into the trigger hole. And the minute I try and get everything's in the way, and it's very difficult. And this ledge here, you really want like an extra 1/8 of an inch to get it to fit. And you're going to be tempted after fighting this to just say, screw this, and like push it. Do not do that. You will bend your bar out of spec and you're going to have problems. This is also why we have not put down and attached this leg of our sear spring yet. Because here's the trick. Get your sear up and out of the way. Get your safety lever up and as far forward as humanly possible. Now, at about like a 45 degree, you're going to make sure the trigger goes into the trigger hole. And with that forward, you may have to like hold it forward. That's going to allow the bar to go around and pop in. That is the trick. If you do not do that, you are going to hate life. until you realize that trick and you figure out the safety lever forward, the sear forward. It's going to be very hard, and you're going to spend like 45 minutes just sitting here fiddling with it instead of what could take you 2 seconds. We are going to take our trigger pin. It has a notch in it. That notch needs to be facing the left side of the frame. So we will line up our trigger so the hole is visible. We're just going to plop that through. If you want to use a punch to make that nicer, you can do that. Next up, we're going to put in our slide release. For that, we're just going to allow the trigger pin to go back a tiny amount, not all the way, just enough space for us to get this in place. I'll hold on to it and push through. That's easier because you can see what you're doing. There we go. And then another kind of hard part, you need to make sure that this is all the way over against this side of the frame. And then you are going to take your flathead screwdriver and make sure not only that the notch is flat, so like that, but also if you turn it backwards, you should see some like slots appear on that. Those slots need to be facing like down at an angle like this. So this is the correct flat. 180 degrees from there is the wrong flat. You'll see those notches on the back. So if you see them on the back, just turn it 180 degrees and you'll be good. We then take our locking block and this curly spring, it's got a hook at one end that goes into this slot. And we're going to put it as this slot here is what's going to go around that horizontally oriented pin. It is troublesome frequently, so you might have to pull it out and try again a couple of times. Also, there is a way that you can install it where you think it's fine and this front hole will not align with that back hole. It'll be off by like 1/16 of an inch. Obviously, pull it out, try again. See, it lines up. You'll also notice that spring, you can see it in the bottom little portion. There's a reason for that. You see this ledge on your takedown lever? That you'll use as a fulcrum point to get it in, and then that spring actually locks into both positive positions on the other side when it's fully installed, so that when you have it in the locked position, the spring keeps it there. When you have it in the open position, the spring keeps it there, and you can rotate it to either here or here to remove it. So we're going to take that ledge and place it down and in until it stops. And again, we're going to use it as a fulcrum. So we're going to turn it clockwise and push. And you're halfway through. So here, once you get in, you can, again, turn a little bit, but all you really have to do is push, and now it's locked. The last two things for us to do are spring related. This little guy here, there's a hook end, like full hook, and then there's like a partial hook end. Partial hook end goes into this tiny hole in the frame, and then the hook end does not go up here. It goes all the way down at the bottom there. Final step. Now that we have everything where we like it, we are going to take a flathead screwdriver, push it on the top of this sear spring, and we are going to get it to where it goes underneath the integral pin in the frame. There we go. See how it's underneath that pin now, not above? Now we can function check this. I should be able to cock it and do a nice single action. I should also be able to do double action. Yep, fantastic. You might say, why would I wait all the way until this stage to do my function checks? Why wouldn't I do it a lot earlier before I've put in some of these other difficult parts? You're right, you could have put that sear spring down underneath that pin earlier, when we first had just a couple of the parts in before we did the locking block or before some other stuff, and you could have done function checks then. But remember, that sear spring being up is what allows us to play with those parts to get the trigger bar in without hating the world. So if you do function check earlier, just remember to pop that back up. You just take this flathead and knock it off again, and then install the rest easily. To really test it, let's throw our grips on. So we put one, and then I recommend, if you're happy with everything and you're finalizing this, to do it a little tighter than I'm going to, but I'm just going to snug them. Mine is an aluminum frame, so I'm not trying to strip some screw holes. That would be bad. You can Loctite them if you're extra paranoid. And this back, once you get it, will sort of like kind of clip in together. That is the trigger swap. I'm going to throw an upper on this, and then we'll do some more function checks, and we'll also do a trigger pull test with our new trigger. It is now together. I should be able to double action. Yep. Wonderful. I should be able to single action. I should have a fairly short reset. Fantastic. And that short reset I have because I did the SRT, remember. You might have a longer reset if you did not do that. And, oh yeah, of course, we can do our Decocker. Function tests, wonderful. Let's also take a look at what this is like from a trigger pull weight perspective. I'm going to get it perpendicular, and then we're going to let this do the rest. It's pretty high. It's up there with the Kellerman for that full pull. But this is where the double action, single action style wins. Well, let's look at our trigger pull weight for single action. We're at about 5 pounds. Let's try that again. Four and a half pounds. So yes, we still do have that heavy double action, but that's to be expected. But if we're just having fun on the range, nothing stops us from cocking it and going from there and just doing single action, and the slide's going to reciprocate and it's going to be ready with single action for the next one. Having that second trigger pull be a normal trigger weight, to me, is what I was looking for here.